The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the webinar on cover letters and resumes, what to include and where. This is part of the Boost Your Career webinars that are co-sponsored by Sue Mentors and Tulane University. Today, you'll be hearing from me, Sue Griffey, also known as Sue Mentors. We're going to talk about cover letters and resumes and where the content comes from and how you adapt content without being repetitive in both places. This webinar specifically came about because I get a lot of questions from mentees on this topic. I also want to let you know that all mentees whose work I'm showing have given me approval to use their information. I've tried to blind it as much as possible, but they've been very generous about letting you learn from their experiences. Let's start with a little background first. We have several webinars that are useful for you to review. One of the most important related to today's topic is why do I need a resume and CV? And that will take you through the detail of why you need both documents. Important because we'll be talking about both the CV and the resume today. We have 2 webinars on ways that you can demonstrate experience even when you don't think you do have experience, and a recent webinar that we did on showing and rating your skills and what you do about demonstrating skills across a variety of skill types. But what we have to remember is you're writing a CV, a resume, and writing a cover letter to get a job. And the basis for everything you're going to be doing is the position description or the job description, the job announcement, whatever phrase you want to use to describe it. It's the recruiting organization's tool that says, this is what we need from you and this is what's required in the job. This is a 2-page job description that I worked with a mentee to respond to. In red, I've put in the red boxes where there's what we call quals and requirements, qualifications and requirements. And you'll see highlighted in yellow things that I worked with her to identify where she thought she was strong to respond to the job. The advice for how you read a position description is to look for 5 to 10 keyword phrases. You can say keywords, but usually it's a phrase. In the requirements and qualifications, sometimes it's also in the responsibilities and duties that are the main parts of the job that you are most responsive to. So let's look at another one. Here's another job description that came for a more senior level person. It was a executive director position. And when I looked at it, there were a lot of tasks allocated or responsibilities across 2 different content areas, fundraising and program management. What you'll see in how I highlighted things in green, blue, and yellow was my attempt to put some buckets of tasks together or responsibilities together. So there's one that's overall on strategy, not just strategy direction, that's also strategy planning and strategy implementation. The green then is what I look at as more internal work, and that is operational and program management, finances, administration, staffing, looking at the ways in which programs are following what they need for funding and budgets. And then the blue, and you'll see the blue is in both the program management and the fundraising, actually crosses into more external work, bringing in funds, but also outreach and relationships. So it's another way for you to think through a job description. What are you supposed to be doing? What do you need to then respond to in the qualifications? We're going to see adaptation throughout what I'm presenting today. And if you've listened to me on other webinars or you've worked with me, you may hear me say, write once, use often, and disseminate everywhere. I'm a big proponent of making sure that you don't have to write the same things over and over again by making sure you have the content written in one place that you can use it. And that one place for what you're doing with a resume and cover letter writing is your CV. So just a reminder, I mentioned this before, why do I need a resume and CV is a webinar that will show you why you need it and give you some hints for how to work with the two different documents. But basically, here's an image that will explain it. Top left, here's a person I worked with who was 2 years out of school. Her resume was the same length as her CV because she didn't have enough to fill up more than 2 pages. But by the time the next person I worked with, who in the middle image of the image had been with her career 10 years, she's already up to 5 pages. And if you continue to only write a resume and tailor it for each job, you're losing valuable historical information. So remember, your CV is your history. And at the bottom right, you'll see a career of more than 20 years. I could only get 8 of the 14 pages on the image. It's your historical document. It's also a writing sample because that's where you write and write persuasively about the achievements and accomplishments you've had. So when we talk about tailoring, you'll see the blue image in the background is that full CV. You're tailoring your resume and writing your cover letter using information from your CV, from your history. The resume is to demonstrate the relevance you have for a job. The cover letter is to write the high-level experience and achievements you have for the job, basically in a fun way to get the reader excited to open your resume and application. So we're going to break this down into 2 parts, tailoring your resume and writing the cover letter, and we'll start with the resume first. Here's a question I always get, and you'll see these resumes all have different formats. 1 page or 2. My advice is always do 2 unless it's specified in the job ad. I will tell you I've looked at probably 30 or 40 job ads in the last few months working with different mentees, and nowhere do they specify a 1-page resume or a 2-page resume. They just say resume and cover letter. A word of caution before we talk more about the resume, and that is the use and availability of online templates. These are images from 2 different sites. Nowadays, with resume scanning systems, job application systems, the fancy formatting isn't always friendly to you in terms of making sure the key information in your resume is picked up by the scanning system. There will also be a resume on job application systems that you'll be able to refer to for this. But take heed, for example, on the right, that image, a lot of those colors that are used are very dark background with white text on it. And you know, if you ever use white text and copy it into a document, you sometimes lose it for formatting. But also there's a lot of information that's in sidebars, the brown, for example, and on the image on the left-hand images, the teal and the blues are trying to describe skills. You'll see little things that look like graph lines, bar graphs that are trying to describe skills. Resume scanning systems cannot always pick up words that are in image blocks or colored blocks. If you want a more effective way to show and rate your skills, check our webinar out on showing and rating your skills, because you're not confined then to just trying to use a fancy resume template. So let's look, we're going to look at 2 examples about where do you take your information from and what are you trying to convey in your resume. This first example is from someone who had graduated from college. She was working and also doing a master's degree at the same time. So what you always want to do is make sure that you've taken from your full CV this minimum of information at the top in your header information. Not just your name, but also your degree. make sure you put a city, state, and zip, because I learned recently that LinkedIn recruiters use zip codes rather than cities or states for recruiting. So you want to help people out. Again, I often say, don't make people do your work for you. So give people, the reader, what they are going to need to contact you and make you an offer. Contact information and your LinkedIn URL so that they can click through and see who you are and who you're connected to. I encourage people to spend the space wisely. And I know that when I work with young professionals who are writing resumes, they get really, really focused on 2 pages and they can't possibly fit everything in. It's worth it to take the time to put in what I call a biopara. That's a summary paragraph that tells your story. It's not just here's everything I've done, but this is who I am and this is where I'm headed for. I say that it should be 1/4 to 1/3 of the page, and we will be having a webinar on that. I have a recipe for how you write the 6 or 7 sentences in your biopara that most people have found very helpful. This woman decided to put her education next because she could show that she was working with her master's, even though she wasn't going to get it for another year or so. And that way it helped explain her bachelor's degree and also what she was applying for. Then you put your experience in, and this is where you take from your CV what you've done, and you've already in your CV crafted discussions, the descriptions of how your experience in each job has rolled out. The 2 things you want to remember is you want to demonstrate your value and describe your achievements. Do not write to I was responsible for or I supported a team. You write to what your role was, bringing your expertise forward and achievements that you have. And we'll see examples of these. You can also then, on the second page, put in the things that round you out as a professional in the world. Awards and honors, civic engagement. You can put in skills, language skills, for example, or maybe you have a lot of technology skills in an unusual statistical package like Tableau and R that you want to mention. Memberships and associations, and you'll see in the next example also what I call your intellectual property. Take note here. I cropped this so that you could read a lot more of it, but if you look at the top, towards the top on the right, everything in red is about margins. Leave a 1-inch margin on the left and a 1-inch margin on the top. You can go a little closer on the right to 8/10 of an inch or 7/10 of an inch, and maybe a little longer on the bottom. But do not use 1/4-inch margins all around. It makes it very, very difficult for people to absorb all that information. It makes it very cramped. And frankly, your resume is one of the first writing samples that people see from you. So if they don't see something that's attractively formatted, as well as with the content that is easy for them to read and absorb, it's not going to be a person they're going to want to hire. Here's a resume for a person who's worked more than 15 years. She got everything that she needed to on 2 pages, and her CV is much longer than this. Same thing as the previous one, header information. Her biopara is probably 3 or 4 lines longer than the previous one, but still a good amount of her professional experience is on the first page. So as recruiters go down the left-hand side, and what I've learned over the past few years is you used to have 30 seconds to get their attention. We're now at 6 or 7 seconds that they go down and try to tell a story. If you've already told your story for them, they can go down and then find some of the specifics in the each job's information. On her second page is where you see what I call the intellectual property. Publications, reports, social media, presentations. These are all ways to demonstrate written and oral communication skills, your ability to contribute in program management and in strategic planning when you can do different intellectual property products. And in her case, she moved her education to the end because her name had her degree with her up in her contact information, and the rest of her education wasn't extremely important to point out at the beginning. So let's move on to content now for the resume. And I want to remind you, we're going back now to the position description and the qualifications in it. 5 to 10 keywords that are how relevant you are. So this is not everything I know how to do. You don't want to tell them every single skill you have. You want to show them that you know what they're asking for and what you can bring to the position. So this position description is with the resume of the 15-year plus professional that I mentioned earlier. And I've color-coded this so that I can point out a couple things to you. In the red box on the lower right is where all the qualifications are. The red box, educational youth-based organization. You see in 2 places they can verify that, yes, she's actually currently working in that kind of organization. The blue box, the first of the blue boxes, is on fundraising. 2 different arrows. She's talked about how she secured in her biopara over $12 million in funding from 2 different kinds of donors. And then she also mentioned in her present job quite a bit of work that she'd done to grow an operating budget, to write grants and win those grants, and how much she also got from for-profit businesses. The second blue box on building and managing a board, she had specifically had something in her resume on that. I didn't say earlier, but when you read qualifications, the most important are at the top, and then there's usually decreasing importance as it goes down the line. So think about that when you're looking at what you respond to. But you can see already she's got a lot of things on the first page of her resume that make it easy for people to see how relevant she is for the job. The green on staff management, 2 different places, how she grew the staff and the organization, tripled the number of FTE as full-time equivalents. And also then in her discussion in her professional career of her present job, that she actually not only had 75 staff, but 12 direct reports, which shows that she had quite a large team that she was responsible for leading. And interestingly enough, her ability to show her strong public speaking skills is in her biopara, where she talks about presenting and publishing internationally, and also put in on her second page the key publications that were important for this work. Turning now to the cover letter, it's important to remember that the cover letter is a business letter. It has a specific format, and I became really aware of this a few months ago when a mentee I was working with, who was finishing up grad school, asked me to help her with a cover letter, and I asked her to send me the file, and she said, well, it's just an email. Can I forward you the email? She was young. She wasn't raised like I was, who learned more about writing letters that we had to type and put in an envelope. But she did understand that there were reasons to write a cover letter differently. As I said earlier, your cover letter is also a writing sample, so that's why you want to put your best foot forward. Let's look at what's not good about formats that you may see. The one on the left is just too crowded. This is the actual size, and you can see those are literally probably 1/4 inch margins on each side. And she has 3 big chunky paragraphs that make it hard to read through all that information and absorb it. The one on the right, I call it too informal. That one came from jobscan.com as a template. it doesn't follow a lot of the best practices we're going to go over about what the format needs to be. But the reason I called it too informal is Joe JobScan didn't even start with a salutation. It was just Nancy. And I don't know who Nancy is. I don't know what organization he's writing to, because the only information in there in terms of where the letter came from is from his information, but you don't know where it's going to. And interestingly enough, in the red box towards the middle top of the right, these were two recommendations of a list of recommendations and processes that JobScan recommended you follow. The last two were mention any attachments and use sincerely or something before you sign your name. And he didn't do either of the recommendations of the template they showed. So that's one reason to follow a template and follow good practices. So you think, okay, well, why don't I just use an online template? There must be others than the JobScan one. And indeed, there was a pretty good one, I thought, that came from thebalancecareers.com. But you can see in red things that I thought were missing that were opportunities. And we are going to talk about these more later, as well as things that they did that were good, that Thalia wrote that were good. So just so you know, be careful about an online template, and hopefully in the next few slides I'll convince you to just you make your own format from what I'm showing you, and you can write once, use often, and use it for disseminating everywhere. First rule of thumb about your cover letter is it should be about 3/4 of a page. Don't fill up the page. Just like with the resume, do not pack the page full. Use spacing and bullets to guide the reader. You want to make it easy for the reader to know what's going on and why you're writing and what you're emphasizing. And balance the print and the white space so that you don't have, as we saw in a couple slides ago, that one that was too crowded. She had a paragraph that was almost half of the page. So here's the format. Letterhead. Today's date, make sure you put a date in. I don't know why people have dropped dates lately, but what's happened, what does happen is you lose track of when you sent something. And if you don't have a date in the letter, people who receive it don't know when you wrote it. They're assuming it's pretty recent. But also, I learned from a mentee last year. She said, well, I know it because I know when it was because it's the date that I saved the file. Well, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes different file saving systems will change dates. If you move to a new computer or you move to a new backup drive, sometimes those systems can change dates. And you don't know on the receiving end how that person's hard drive, when it goes and is downloaded either on a hard drive or in the cloud, how that date is captured. In some cases, it's the date that they actually do the download, not the date it was put into the system. Make sure you have the contact information for the company as much as possible. It just helps you have everything in one place. And always include a line or subject line that says what the job title is and anything else you know. They may say the job number, reply to this job number. If there's a closing date, put it in there. It just shows that you're cognizant of that. And then this is where Joe JobScan lost me when he said Nancy. It was very easy for him to say, Dear Nancy. In this case, I wrote hiring manager. So I didn't know the name of the person, but at least it specifies the title of the person that I think will receive it. We're going to spend much more time on the body of the letter in a few more minutes. Do put in a closing, as Joe JobScan didn't. He said thank you instead of sincerely, best regards, but something that closes your letter, and put in your full name. It may seem ridiculous because you've got that in your letterhead, but it's just a signal that you are closing the document. You can type in your name, or if you have an image of your signature and you want to put that in there before you make a PDF of the file, that's fine too. And as JobScan recommended, but Joe JobScan didn't do, you want to put ENCL, which is an abbreviation for enclosures. In this case, it's a resume. Make sure the resume has at least your last name. I always recommend the kind of document. As you see, I did an underline and then resume. And put the month and the year, because when I would receive resumes from people, I would always like to know, if I went back to them, how out of date they might be or when the last time the person had saved it. So adaptation. This is a very easy one. Your CV that you started with has a header that includes a lot of information, contact, degrees, LinkedIn profile. You put a lot of that same information in your letterhead. On the bottom right is a letter that I wrote several years ago. I just changed the date for this year. Made my own letterhead to send a letter to a company that was recruiting me for a position. I did not have a subject line there, but that was because this was a second letter from directly to the company after working with a recruitment organization that wanted me to apply. Let's talk now about content, and this is what gives people a lot of anxiety about writing a cover letter. On the left is my recipe, and we're going to take this apart slide by slide. We're going to go through each of the paragraphs. But basically the message for that red box of information is you're going to take out of the job description 3 to 5 of the strongest quals and requirements that you meet, and write your experience and achievements to those. Some of this comes off your CV directly. You may even have these summary statements there. So this is, again, adaptation from one document to another. Paragraph 1, 1 to 2 sentences, and this is trying to state your high-level relevance for the position. So let's look on the left. We've already seen Thalia. This is the template, Thalia's document. Her opportunity to mention her degree would have been important because she spent in her second paragraph a line saying, I have a bachelor's degree, blah, blah, blah. She did mention her experience, but her bachelor's degree in digital media, like many things that we have been trained to do, it's helpful to know, but what you're trained to do is not what you actually have done. And so if you keep in mind experience is what people want much more than what college course did you take or what specialization did you do, then that will help you understand why having your degree up top is fine and not making a big deal in writing about your education. She didn't have the job title up top, so she wrote a long sentence, the first full line, about writing to apply today for the open position. People know if they get a letter that you're writing for a job. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm laughing about it, but it's an obvious statement, and you waste a lot of time and blah, blah, blah to write that and say that. And her second sentence, I just want to caution you because I have had mentees that have done a similar thing in a cover letter. You don't know how the name of the colleague, this one, Ms. Anna Boston, you don't know how that colleague is received. It was hard to know if that person actually knew Ultimate Beauty as the job, the company, or why this was so important. And so you want to be careful about saying, oh, so-and-so at your company told me I should apply. She also mentioned a letter of reference. No one wants letter of references with your cover letter, or almost never. I did hear last week from a mentee who said she was asked to provide some references, but that's extremely unusual. So you don't want to write information that's not useful to the person who's reading it, who you want to get them to open your resume and get you in for an interview. I will just say while we're on this page, if you think about this for the next page, the second paragraph, the second sentence, this is a way where people need to reframe what they're saying. No one cares how this woman learned to use all forms of social media at Glamourbox. They care what she actually did with it. And it took her till another sentence to actually say that. So most of the time, we forget when we're writing cover letters and resumes that our job is to solve the hiring manager's problem, which is I have an unfilled position and I need someone who's got experience for that position. So instead of saying I'm passionate about global health, you want to write all the experience you've had in it and reframe that so that they can say, oh, this person's going to solve what I need. All right, on the right is from the letter that we're going to continue to take apart. This is text that I helped someone that I worked with write, and then I framed it into the larger Jane Doe letter. But she doesn't say, I'm writing to apply for a job. We already know she's applying. What she says in her second sentence, even though it's a little long, is she related what the built environment coordinator position as part of the built environment team that she was joining. She talked about that team's work in the targeted areas and the grant work, and how her experience and what in those three areas could support the grant work that the whole built environment team is doing. Her high-level relevance. Paragraph 2 is the big part of you demonstrating enough interest and relevance that people want to get you in to talk about the job. 2 to 4 sentences generally. This is a little longer, but the way it's spaced, it's fine. It's just you don't want to bombard people like the cover letter I showed you that was too crowded, where she put 3 huge paragraphs in. And you're just writing on your key relevant experience. I would say keep it to the 3 strongest quals you have, but it may be that you want to put in more. But the idea is you relate it to the big parts of the position description and talk about your achievements. So you can see right up front, 2 decades of work in complex project management, a variety of clients. Her first bullet, she simultaneously managed multiple complex portfolios and ensured that deliverables were done on time and within budget. Those are important statements to be able to make. Then she said more than 17 years of experience in presenting and communicating in multi-million-dollar projects. All of a sudden you're thinking, oh, this is big, huge amounts of project work that she's dealt with. You can see she must be comfortable with presentation skills and with talking to clients about change orders and work that needs to be delivered. And then she also mentioned that she has attention to detail and commitment to quality service. That third bullet, she could have put a little more evidence in, but it's clear that her 2 decades of work related to her Master's of Health Education and Promotion, a degree she was just finishing. She was working to integrate that into the kind of work she was applying for and saying, you're not hiring a new graduate out of college, you're hiring someone who's got 2 decades of work along with her now public health experience. The closing paragraph, like the first paragraph, short, 1 to 2 sentences, and focus on timing, flexibility, follow-up contact. You don't need to say thank you for reviewing my resume. So I thought that the sentence that Thalia on the blue box in the middle on the left was a useful sentence to think about. Thank you for your time and considering me. That's okay. But I've included my resume, she said, and I'll follow up with an email next week. So she's specific about saying what she's done to meet the requirements of the application process. Next week for an application is usually pretty quick, but this is where it's helpful to know. If there's a closing date, you might want to say, I know the closing date is March 30th and maybe today's March 15th. I will contact you if I don't hear from you within a month. As you see in the red box above, that's the last of Jane Doe's application. She said, I'm available to start immediately. So maybe it's an urgent job, or maybe they're looking for someone who can start immediately, and that could put her at the top of the list. And she said, and you can reach me anytime at the information above. So there's ways to do this, but don't go on and on about, I know you'll find I'm the ideal candidate. They get people who read these letters, just like reading resumes, get tired of reading that you're the most excellent, unique person, because we all say that about ourselves. All right, so let's talk about a missed opportunity of a mentee I worked with and look at what she could have done better. The big job descriptions in the background, it's a 2-page job description for a program coordinator, and the box on the left shows the qualifications of what the job requirements are. And on the right is her cover letter. On the left, she and I had worked together to identify the areas she was strongest in. But when her cover letter came through, most of what she wrote in yellow on the right was not aligned to those actual qualifications, professional and oral and written communication skills, demonstrated capability to work on concurrent projects, but at a much lower level, where she said, I managed project activities. That's pretty good. I prepared travel arrangements, travel reimbursements, purchase goods. Those are all low-level tasks. So in the blue box above, here's the things I think she missed being able to say. And these are things I know about her from working with her. The first requirement was 2 years of administrative or project management experience. She had 6+ years in complex and concurrent project management, meaning she could juggle more than one grant at a time. Second, oral and written communication skills, interact and communicate. In this case, it says members of all levels of the organization. What she was saying, I've worked across time zones and work settings with a variety of stakeholders and in different communication modes. That's a very powerful statement for her to make, because it says, I'm used to dealing with a variety of ways that I've got to communicate. And the fourth yellow highlighted on the left job description, ability to accommodate urgent tasks. Instead of talking about planning and doing meeting event planning that she did, she could have said, handled travel and event management urgencies on a 24/7 basis. That means, yeah, I can handle urgent tasks that come into the normal things that I'm doing. So I wanted you to see where a mentee missed an opportunity to tell her story and write an effective cover letter. Now let's go back to a qualifications list on the right that you've seen a lot of already, and now the cover letter for the resume, the person who'd been 15+ years in her job. So identify 3 of the strongest quals and write to her experience. The first qual was an educational youth-based organization. We talked about that in the resume. You can see that she's written that now in the first sentence or the first paragraph that she wrote in her cover letter. Success and leadership in an entrepreneurial, fast-paced environment. Her last paragraph focuses a lot on more than a decade of work she's done, which shows the kinds of institutions and the different experiences that will give readers an indication that she's used to a fast-paced environment and was successful at it. The red box is around fundraising and building a board and strategic relationships. So fundraising, again, we saw the details on the fundraising. She tripled the annual budget, for example. But here she talked about fundraising across a diversity of funding streams. What's interesting about this is that she expanded services and got new sources of funding. So that's something that a hiring manager would want to know, like, oh, you found new sources, not just the same sources. You can see also the last, engaging and fostering mutually beneficial strategic relationships. Again, she addressed that in that last paragraph, where she talked about working with different kinds of groups to educate and elevate youth. So as we wind up, one piece of advice, and this comes from Absolutely Abby online, a woman named Abby Kohut, who gave this advice in a webinar I listened to. She said, even if they don't ask for a cover letter, write it and put it at the very back of your resume, so that when you make the PDF of your resume, it'll go and be all one package. As far as I know, no one's ever counted the number of pages in what you sent for a resume. And she said, if they don't read it, they don't read it, but at least it's there. I thought that was great advice. I'm passing it along to you. So in summary, you're going to start with the job requirements. That provides the basis for what you're doing. And then you're going to go to your CV and take information and writing sections off of your CV to tailor your resume to the job. I know it's not fun to tailor resumes. Everybody tells me that, and with the amount of job applications people sometimes have to do, it can get very difficult. But believe me, it's a lot easier as long as you have a full history, your CV, and writing, you've already done your writing samples. And remember that the cover letter is not to tell people everything you've done, but how to engage the reader, get them excited about your story so that you can draw attention to what's in your resume and they're going to want to follow up further with you. Thank you very much for attending. Don't forget to check our channel for the many other Boost Your Career webinars and a variety of professional development webinars that Tulane Alumni Career Services has available to you. Please contact Sarah or Sue for more information on this topic or ideas about another webinar you'd like.